welcome to the interview with our guest, Yuri Bobbert and Hao Dinh. And together with Suzanne from ISACA, we would like to interview Yuri about zero trust and how help us with technical part. Suzanne, can you introduce yourself to our member?
Yes. So my name is Suzanne Janse. I have been a member of ISACA since I started my career nearly 20 years ago at Arthur Andersen. And I have been member of the board for the last 2.5 years. But the coming period, I would like to focus more a bit on the content and some of this that is being discussed today. Happy to be here and welcome Yuri and Hao that you're working along with us in this interview.
Yeah, thank you. And Yuri, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, yeah. So thank you for the invitation. My name is Yuri Bobbert. 2 roles. One is a academic director for the University of Antwerp, the management school of Antwerp Management School, that is, and a CISO of Ontoit. And Ontoit is a global cybersecurity organization fully focused on zero trust.
Thank you. And Hao Dinh, please.
Yeah, thank you for having us. My name is Hao Dinh. I'm a security consultant at EY, where I specialize in security architecture and engineering domains. And I love to work closely with organizations to ensure security within the highly technical, dynamic, and regulated domains. And topics I currently focus on are DevSecOps, microservices security, and of course, zero trust. And as a security consultant, the challenge towards successful implementation of initiatives here is to ensure the right mix between technology, business, and organizations.
Thank you. And to start with this interview about zero trust, for most of us, we just read about it, but you guys are expert on this field. Could you take us into your story about zero trust?
Well, we have a couple of views on the topic zero trust. So zero trust is known since 2010. It was then launched by John Kindervaag, then working for Forrester, but it was already out there in the field before 2010, and then it had several names. The main concept of zero trust is that because data is nowadays scattered all over the place, it also requires another strategy when it comes to information security, where we're used to secure our assets by building big walls surrounding our assets. Those assets are now residing all over the place, in cloud, industry control systems, IoT, smart device, they're all over the place. So the idea is that with zero trust, you focus on critical assets that you want to protect, regardless of the location, and that you build your strategy surrounding those assets, and that you put microsegments or segments surrounding those assets. So you compartmentalize your environment and put on those compartments security measures. We've identified 8 zero trust security measures, and it's just the basic of implementing those zero trust measures. And an example of a measure is one of the principles of least privilege, and the other one is, for example, you always verify who is accessing those assets. So always, never trust and always verify. And therefore you need technology. So the technology that you have should be able to utilize that zero trust. So there are 2 concepts with zero trust. One is the strategic approach to it. So looking from the view of critical assets and segmenting. And the other one is the technology part. And that's the capability of the technology should be fit enough to utilize it. And that's also the main reason why Hao and I collaborate quite often, where EY is the consulting organization helping organizations into developing a strategic direction, where Ontoit is predominantly focusing on implementing it in a technology environment and making it managerial happen. So basically, because in the run organization, you have by far more events to monitor, because you have more compartments, more measures, more events, and to manage that in your run environment. So we're talking about the change and the run in the run environment. We as Ontoit are specialized in that by using our own build technology. So that's a long answer to your question.
Yes, but very interesting. In practice, how you deal with zero trust? How can you help organization with implementing or manage zero trust in practice?
I think one of the things that we often see with organizations and mostly on the larger scale organizations is that their IT environment is getting more and more complex, right? As what Yuri just said, is that you have IoT, but you have cloud computing, you have microservices, you have your old premises, you have your outsourced services, and getting an overview and getting that in control is quite a big challenge, and getting even more challenging in the future. And I think approaching that from a micro segment perspective and adding those authentication layers to verify who's trying to access your data and when and where, and with all the logging, zero trust can really help an organization to at least get a grip of the situation and who is trying to access their data.
Wonderful, thank you. Suzanne, do you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, so we thought it might be interesting for the people that are keen to join the webinar on the 3rd of February is to learn a bit more how this actually work in practice. So can you maybe give a use case or a situation on how this was implemented or...
Yeah, so we Ontoit now implement zero trust since 2010. So we are highly friends with John Kindervaag, the founder of Zero Trust, and since he launched it, we are basically adhering to that vision and implementing quite some environments throughout Europe. A very very interesting public example is Damen Shipyards. Damen Shipyards is one of the few large global organizations that is enrolling Zero Trust now already for 7 years. And they have established also initially a very solid design of Zero Trust and later on implemented it in their security operations. Took them some time. They also came across the first pitfalls and first hurdles. The story of the CISO, he is evangelizing that all over the world nowadays because Zero Trust becomes more and more hype. That is one public example that we have. Hao and I also developed a full case study that could be interesting for the viewers because we are going to deal with that case study in the presentation that we're going to have in February. And that is on a fictive hospital, similar like a real hospital. And we are going to decompose that hospital into segments and then going to tell the viewers on what's the strategy for this hospital. Typical hospital like any other hospital, engaging in smart devices, want to learn and want to establish new models on data, want to outsource more stuff, want to work in the cloud. So typically the topics that you see nowadays with every organization, we have completely incorporated that into the case. And that case is a very interesting one because it really addresses all the strategic elements that you should have for Zero Trust. And that's also something that we can highlight then in that session. So therefore it's interesting because we really are going to focus on how are you going to implement it.
And as you know, the participants on the webinar mostly professional from cybersecurity, auditing, and also our members of ISACA or NOREA. What can you want to say to those professionals about what they cannot miss? Why should they come to this webinar, and what for interesting story or knowledge you can share with them?
Yeah, so I think this is a very good question. So what can the viewers from ISACA and the other communities that are attached to this webinar can see and learn is that typically I come from a CISO background. I was the CISO for NN Group, Nationale Nederland Group, global organization, where I had to deal with a lot of regulation and also auditors. Anybody had an opinion of the security organization, including the auditor while we are integrating Delta Lloyd after the acquisition. So when you're looking at Zero Trust, and how the auditor can objectively determine, can I give assurance over this organization after a year, typically in your IT audit, then Zero Trust largely enables that in a far more positive way. The good thing is, for example, that when you're talking about least privilege and access to assets, everything is logged. So all the events are logged. So in this case, all the log evidence is in the code or in the logs of the firewall equipment. What you ideally do in this situation is that when you're working with technology, and now it becomes a little bit techy, but I think it's good to understand for the people who wants to view it. If you have hundreds of devices taking care of all those assets being accessed by services, applications, or data is being accessed, those events, there are millions of events. And millions of events, you cannot simply interpret it, analyze, and report on that in a manual way. So you should automate that. And by automating that in a what we call a security automation and orchestration response platform, you have all the logs aggregated in one system. And it makes it far more easier for auditors or any risk professional or anybody in the second or third or the fourth line of the organization to judge that, because everything is there. And the interpretation of that is basically mostly done on the logs of all of those devices. So instead of going to individual devices, individual assets, you now have it all aggregated in one log, one big system. And it makes it far more easier for an auditor to judge on that. And that's also a completely different view when you're talking about Zero Trust for cybersecurity. There's also Zero Trust for auditing professionals, because your audit profession also changed. And I think that's also something that we addressed in a recent publication that we did from the university, where the auditor opinion and the auditor profession is likely to change, because he is more and more auditing the code of pipelines, but also the code of such platforms. So there's a need also for people in those areas in terms of professional capability development.
Okay, so can you then summarize which professionals you would be most interested, or at least get most value out of your session?
And so I think ideally, typically what you see in sessions that Hao and I are organizing, you see architects and technicians, people that are passionate about security. But we also see nowadays that a strategic direction of the organization, so typically something that the CEO or the CIO does, requires other capabilities and other views on how to secure that. Zero Trust fits in that, because it's more a strategic direction on how to approach your cybersecurity program. So it's not only for technicians or architects, it's definitely also for people that are involved in strategic decision making or strategic directives. Or also for people that are in supervisory bodies or audit committees. So having an interest by the well-being of the firm and are able to ask the right questions to executive management, how they gain more assurance over the organization.
Yeah, okay. And what I understood is that it's for risk professionals and also for audit professionals, because of the change you foresee in the profession. Also auditors might be benefit from them. Yeah, okay.
And I think to add to that is that the session that we have on the 3rd of February, we focus on giving them the right content to have countervailing power and also to have the right content to have that conversation moving forward in the Zero Trust initiative. So we do not only share experiences and knowledge on Zero Trust, but also provide examples of implementation and give participants the insights needed to start their own Zero Trust journey. And by combining research and practical examples, we offer that 360 view of Zero Trust.
Yeah, wonderful. And okay, I think this is very interesting for our participants. And also, we have also a member of our ISACA or NUREA organization who interested in research on this field. Is there some opportunity within EY or your company Yuri and Hao, to share with our research professional?
Yeah, shall I answer that, Hao?
Hmm?
Yeah, so there are a couple of, we are from the University of Antwerp, we are currently having in total 50 master students doing research in the domain of IT, risk management, digital transformation, architecture, so a whole variety of IT-related studies, where almost every year approximately 15 to 20 students focusing on information security, risk assurance, digital platforms, etc. So more focusing on security and risk management. And we also have students researching into zero trust. For example, we now have a team doing research into legacy, for zero trust for legacy environments, because we see more legacy and how is legacy dealing with zero trust measures that we suggest to implement, like authorization management, access management, content inspections. Is your legacy environment still capable of doing that? So that's a research domain. Another research domain, for example, is looking into containerized environments and avoid lateral movements in containerized environments and how zero trust can enable that. That's something that we do with the University of Amsterdam. We also do an investigation with the TU Eindhoven and the TU Twente, also on zero trust. So we have multiple collaborations with both EY people, with both the universities. And there's one big stream, I think that's relevant for everybody active in this domain, and that is NIST. NIST has, as you know, the US body that's being followed by ENISA, the European body, quite often, is that NIST has developed a special project called the NCCOE project, and they're building lab environments to enable their federal agencies to enroll zero trust. So NIST is fully focusing with the US government on zero trust, fully focusing on that. So that's for us also a signal that for the European market, zero trust is also the way to go forward. And we heavily contributed to those research and also to the establishment of those lab environments. And all those publications are available, either via the university or via the ISACA community. And I think that's a very relevant research domain for everybody that wants to also contribute in terms of science to zero trust, but because there's very few scientific research done in zero trust. We see predominantly companies like Forrester, Gartner, IDC, or tech vendors like Microsoft, Cisco, VMware, Fortify, telling something about zero trust, and that if you implement their technology, then you have a zero trust environment. Well, there's no silver bullet to it, because it's not just simply switching off on the button and tell this is where we are zero trusted. That's not as easy as it is. But so I think the scientific world will benefit from it, but also the practical environment will benefit by more scientific research that we are doing as the University of Antwerp, together with institutes like EY and did you know, by the way, that the University of Antwerp was one of the biggest contributors of COVID and Val IT and all the ISACA products that we have as ISACA?
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I worked for KPMG in Belgium for a while, and all those people were in the international community. So indeed, interesting to see that our Belgian colleague and the University of Antwerp is very much, close to ISACA globally.
And Suzanne, you are also our leader within Lead Tech, and you are also a researcher on this topic, a cybersecurity topic in general. Do you have a question for our guest speaker?
Yes, of course. I was just looking at the time because I'm not sure if we still have time, but indeed this is a favorite question of mine because we're facing this global skills gap in cybersecurity as such. We also still have, specifically in the Netherlands, a challenge of that we want to have a more diverse, let's say, teams. So more women, but also people with a different way of thinking, different backgrounds. So maybe a few words from yourselves on how do you see how we should overcome these challenges of the skills gap, but also in terms of diversity and get more specifically more women into the IT area.
Yeah, Hao, do you want to answer? Shall I answer it?
Yeah, I think we might have both different answers on this from two perspectives, of course. From my perspective, I think there's always been a large gap in knowledge between the classical security domain and also the engineering disciplines on the other side. And actual hands-on skills in any technical domains have become increasingly important, but have become more and more rare, actually. An important movement I see here is that technology abstraction has increased. So technologies like the cloud, microservices, containers, infrastructure as code, etc. And I see large opportunities in the near futures for ones that actually dare to get their hands dirty on these concepts and are able to get aligned with engineers and maybe even help to create tools for engineers to use from a security perspective. Increasing, and that's also a part of diversity, I think, right? So being able to think differently here, so that sometimes means getting those people from other places than you might expect. These people are often inside your organization already. So take a good look into your inside of your organization, see how these people can, be guided and pivoted maybe towards a security role and help them and guide them to become specialists in that field.
Okay.
Yeah, Suzanne, I really like the question because I think it's not only for diversity for, as Hao also mentioned, for women and men, but it is more. We are definitely benefited also by new fuel of new generations.
Yeah.
And so the generation that is used to working with data and mobile devices rather than the old views that we have from typically people that are differently educated, for example, in social sciences, that are now in hardcore technology, that has another influence on how you lead people and how you guide people into becoming a certain professional. I think in general, there is a skills gap, but that skills gap is, it is not directly related to diversity, but the skills gap definitely comes from the fact that it is such a complex and influx domain that it's really hard to cope with that. And I think the best way to cope with it, and that is the traditional rule that we see, is that 80% of what you learn, you do at your job, is that we are here, and Antwerp Management School is also doing that by enabling studying at your job. So also for elderly people, but reintegration, women, everybody, facilitating to work on the job, learn on the job, but also work on projects that really have an impact. Where we have a diversity goal in the university for our technology education to have 50% women into the education. And I personally see that also in the researches that we do, and the promoter role that I have for also 50% are women, is that they are seeking to do assignments that really make an impact to the organization. So they are more focused on adding a contribution to the organization rather than getting a grade, or they do it for their resume. They are more focused on making impact. And what you typically see is that those women, after they made that impact, they, as a result of that, increase in their mindset. They have another mindset, but they also grow in a more natural role as a leader rather than people in the execution. So I think by stimulating more on the job working, regardless if it's a associate degree, bachelor degree, or a master degree, I think that all businesses should have traditional development programs and focusing on enabling that. So that's my personal opinion about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I like the whole concept of lifelong learning. At ISACA, we're also trying to, in the Netherlands, trying to get more content to the people by also having more, let's say, square tables, but also in the next year trying to maybe from each square table have a blog where people can relate to and start searching for more interesting material. So that would also be an option going forward. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe it's one more question left. It's about, on the webinar February, the question is, why should our professional not miss your webinar?
Yeah.
Can you maybe reveal some surprising or some interesting fact that you can share with us?
Yeah, definitely. I think from an EY perspective, EY have developed a readiness assessment to determine how ready am I for approaching zero trust. Onto has developed a fully automated platform to manage that in your run environment. The combination of two, I think, is never seen anywhere out there. I think also John Kindervag himself acknowledged that there's no party out there who is doing that. I think the combination of EY and Onto presenting that on that day is very worthy to watch.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this interview. This is very interesting for our participants on the next webinar in the new year 2021. I think we are come to the end of this interview. I thank you for Hao Dinh and Yuri to make time and effort to come and give us this wonderful interview. And Suzanne, also for your hosting of this interview.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for also making this a learning experience for us. So.
Okay, see you very soon then.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.